So we'll get going right now. And I just want to say for anybody who hasn't already heard about community choice energy or community choice aggregation, basically a policy where local governments are able to take control of the decision making around, they're able to buy and generate power for the local residents. It gives them the ability to make decisions around where their energy's income comes from and prioritize local renewable distributed generation. And we have the three experts I mentioned before. We're gonna start off with Sarah Rizk, and then hear from Tony Seba, and then Paul Fenn. So first I'll just introduce Sarah and have her get right up here, and then we'll hear from each of the others and then open it up for questions and discussion. So Sarah Rizk is an environmental science in the Clean Energy and Climate Change Office at the Environmental Protection Agency, Region 9. In this position, she works with a broad range of partners on reducing greenhouse gases through voluntary action. Sarah's research focuses on the intersection between climate and health benefits, and her recent work quantifies the monetary health impacts of fossil fuel energy and analyzes the policy pathways for reducing black carbon from diesel vehicles, drawing from existing regulatory policies. And Sarah holds an MS and a BS in Earth Systems from Stanford University. So, Sarah?
Thanks. So I'm just going to talk a little bit today about some of the work that EPA does in the renewable energy space and where it intersects here. I do think it's important to start out with sort of a working definition of what CCA is and the programs that we've seen come up here, although maybe Paul will also expand on this, drawing on his experience with these. But it's basically a hybrid model between an investor-owned utility and a municipally operated utility, where the IOU, PG&E, for example, will distribute the energy, so they still run the transmission distribution, they still bill the customers, and then you have your municipal government coming together and contracting out for the renewable or other energy that they want to buy. So what we've seen is Marin launched their program recently, and they do have what's called a deep green option for some customers supplying 100% renewable energy. That product has caused them to be one of the largest purchasers, municipal purchasers of renewable energy in the nation, and we've given them a Green Power Partnership Award for their efforts in bringing more renewable energy to market. So the Green Power Partnership that we run out of our headquarters office is one mechanism by which communities can be awarded for leadership in this area. And so if you're looking at doing an effort like this, I encourage you to look into that program because it can help with some of the publicity and understanding those environmental benefits. As we move forward with CCA in California, we'd really like to see folks embrace a more aggressive model. So Marin and San Francisco, who will be launching their program in this summer, I believe, they have started out with basically buying large amounts of renewable energy on the spot market. They both have contracts with Shell Energy, and this is a great way to get it started because they have a huge amount of struggles to get these programs off the ground. They're doing great things, bringing huge amounts of renewable energy to their customers, and don't get me wrong, I'm very supportive of their programs. I think as communities become more fluent in navigating how to set up a CCA, I'd like to see the newer CCAs become a little bit more aggressive with getting new renewable energy. So not just buying existing renewable energy off the spot market, but actually getting new renewable energy out there, and that's renewable energy that can then replace our existing fossil fuel infrastructure. We are going to likely have a conference at EPA on community choice aggregation, and we're in the planning phase for that now, so I invite you to come find me afterwards if you'd like to be involved in that. We're trying to figure out how and what needs there are that we can fill in this space. So I'm going to talk now about a couple of tools that EPA offers that I think will help communities in starting to try and develop local energy assets for CCA or for other programs that they may have. One of the initiatives that we've done in conjunction with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab out of DOE, is look at contaminated, underutilized, fallow, degraded lands and trying to site renewable energy on those lands as opposed to on pristine lands. We see a lot of environmental impact statements coming in for large solar developments on pristine lands and are trying to divert that development up front so that we're instead developing on contaminated lands. And what this map does that we've developed with NREL is it shows you all of those sites, all the brownfield sites, all the Superfund sites. It also has fallow ag in there, and it maps it all out. We have this static map that gives you an overview of California. We also have an interactive Google Earth mapping tool so you can zoom in on your local area of interest. You can click on those sites, you can see what the renewable energy potential is. And we also did a screening for resource potential so you can see which sites rank highest for resource potential. This project was designed for utility scale renewable energy, but it can also be used for distributed generation. So one of the screening characteristics is if it's a really large acreage site, then it can be used for utility scale generation. But if you are interested in something else, you can also just download the whole data set, put in your own criteria, sort it however you want to meet your specific needs. So hopefully it's adaptable, and you know, we're also just releasing this June. We expect it to be out, and we're open to comments on if we were to improve on it in the future to make it meet other people's needs, what other directions we may take there. So the other tool that we have, which may be useful, is it's more of an umbrella tool. It's looking at solar and wind decision trees for local governments. So this tool, you could basically input some of the data from the mapping tool on specific sites, but you may also have parking lot structures or other structures that you're aware of in your communities that aren't on that map that you also want to evaluate alongside the contaminated land sites for resource potential. You can basically put all of this into our decision tree, and it basically allows you to take a whole list of sites and narrow it down to a more realistic list of sites if you want to do a full feasibility for those studies. And so we see this as being, it's not a full feasibility study, but it does allow a little bit more of a targeted decision making and looking at different sites. And that tool is available now online. So I did want to talk a little bit about some of my own research as well. This is on the health costs of fossil fuel energy. And this is a paper that's currently in press and should be coming out in a month or so. But basically what we did is used the same models that we used for Clean Air Act compliance and quantified the health costs of fossil fuel energy in the US. And you can see the numbers here are quite significant. For coal-fired power plants, it's about 32 cents a kilowatt hour in terms of the health costs that you're bearing for the impact of just the air emissions from that power plant. For fossil fuel energy, based on our current distribution of fuels, it's 24 cents a kilowatt hour. The numbers are much lower in California, but I think this gives some context to how much of a burden we really are bearing just on the health side of things. And these are costs that are being borne by our society today. So I wanted to give you an example of how that could be used in practice, basically adding on that externality to the retail cost before comparing it to renewable energy. So I took a California example here. Say that you're buying 100,000 kilowatt hours, and grid power PG&E is about 12.5 cents a kilowatt hour right now. Marin is offering a 1 cent premium for 100% renewables, so that's 13.5 cents a kilowatt hour. And if you were to then look at, if you were to go for a grid straight option, you'd basically be bearing a cost of $15,500, even though you're only seeing $12,500 of that cost on your bill. But if you were to go with the renewable option, you're seeing $13,500, and so you're seeing a saving in the cost borne by you if you go with the renewable option. And so we'd like to reframe this issue so that folks are starting to think about what the full costs of energy are. And I think this is one analysis that is my personal work, but it draws on EPA data and is published in my EPA capacity. And I think this can be used for practical applications to think not only about the health costs, not only about the climate change issue, but also about the health costs. So just in conclusion, I think that community choice aggregation is one very powerful tool that gives folks the opportunity to change the energy infrastructure decisions that we're making and to help transition from a fossil fuel economy to a clean energy future. And I think it's been tough getting it off the ground, and it's going to be tough figuring out all the financing, which I'll turn to the other folks on the panel to address. But to the extent that we can do it with the largest environmental benefit and look at both the climate and health benefits we're seeing from these policies, I think it has the potential to do great things. Thanks.
Yeah, that was a great transition to Tony, because thank you so much for helping us think about how in local renewables that we can get from community choice aggregation, how important it is for health, and as well as climate impacts, and having those tools to really find out how to replace them. And then we've also really seen the challenge in trying to develop local renewables through community choice aggregation in every way about the financing. You know, oh, renewables are more expensive, that we're always hearing, or we don't have the money to actually build the stuff, so we've got to do these other things. So we're hoping that Tony can give us some knowledge around the financing and help us tackle that and find where those resources can be available for community choice aggregation. And just to introduce Tony Seba, he's a lecturer in entrepreneurship and clean energy at Stanford University, and he's the author of Solar Trillions, 7 Market and Investment Opportunities in the Emerging Clean Energy Economy. A serial Silicon Valley entrepreneur, he was an early employee and held key positions leading business development and strategy for Cisco Systems and RSA Data Security. As the founder and CEO of PrintNation.com, he successfully raised $30 million in venture capital and built the company to industry leadership. He's a keynote speaker at organizations like Google, the Public Works Officers Institute, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Tony has an engineering degree from MIT and an MBA from Stanford. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks for being here, everyone. And that's great work, Sarah. I want to see that published, because I want to use it. So, of course, let me get started with a historical view, as well as a future view of clean versus conventional energy. So if you look at history, conventional energy costs have gone up, and they've gone up since 1970, 4 or 5x. Solar energy, on the other hand, and I'm going to focus on solar, even though many of the things that I'm talking about might apply to wind. Solar energy has gone down throughout history. It's gone down more than 90% over the last 2 decades. And in fact, over the last just year and a half, it's gone down about 60%. So if you look at this, it's clear what's about to happen. It's clear that solar, the cost curve, is going to beat conventional energy any day now, right? Despite what people might say. In fact, we're already there. I had the CEO of Sungevity, Danny Kennedy, Sungevity based here in Oakland, speak in my class at Stanford, and basically he said 78% of his solar business are saving money on day one. So in fact, the day when solar is starting to make sense economically is already here. Last year alone, solar panels went down 50% in cost, just last year. And think about the cost of oil, for instance, over the last year or two, and compare and contrast. And what this is leading to is the following. By 2015, that's only 3 years out, 2/3 of American homes will be paying more money to their utilities for grid electricity than they could be paying for solar. Let me say that again. By 2015, if current trends persist, 40 to 50 million homes in America could get unsubsidized solar at cheaper levelized cost of energy than subsidized conventional energy. And that's in 3 years. Okay, I'm not talking about 2020 or 2030 here, all right? Some utilities are actually noticing this. NRG Energy, which is a major multi-billion-dollar fortune traditional fossil fuel company, has made a big turn to solar. In a recent interview, November, I think, 2011, the CEO said basically solar is going to go from this thing that makes 0.1% of the market to just about 20 to 30% within 3 to 5 years. So a lot of this data, cost data, technology data, learning curve, is coming together even from conventional utilities. So despite what you may have heard, 2011 was a record year in terms of venture capital investments in solar, because they noticed this opportunity that's going to come in within 3 to 5 years. And in fact, the global investment in distributed generation, not just solar, but distributed generation, hit a record last year, $71 billion. And that's 900% up in just 5 years. Okay? So all these things are trending up, are trending in the right direction in terms of distributed energy, in terms of solar energy. Now, some of the conversation here has been about the million solar roofs and about the 12 gigawatts of distributed generation that are the goal for 2020. And we have in California at the end of 2011, we had 100,000 PV installations and just about 1 gigawatt of solar. So we are 10x away from that goal. The question is, can we make it, right? Can we grow in 8 years, 10x, both in terms of solar roofs and in terms of distributed generation total? One fact is we grew 100x over the last 10 years. Can we grow 10x over the next 10? Well, let's look at some of the things that might impact that, and I'll tell you why I think we are going to make it, and then some. So look at the bottom line here, and if you get nothing else out of this presentation, I want you to take a look at the impact of finance on the cost of solar and the cost of energy, okay? Clean energy. So what the bottom graph is saying is the difference between the return, basically the interest rate, that you pay to build a solar power plant can make a 10x difference in the cost of solar. I repeat that. Solar could be, so when people talk about the cost of solar, they give you a number, 15 cents, 20 cents, 18 cents. Well, in fact, that number is not real. That number depends on two things: solar radiation, which is the graph on top, and financing, which is the graph on bottom. And of the two, financing makes the biggest difference, 10x difference. Just a 5% difference in the interest rate, just an 8% difference in the interest rate that you pay to build a solar power plant can increase the cost of solar by 10x. Does that make sense? So financing is huge. Yes, we have to lower the cost of technology and all that good stuff, but technology today is so cheap that it can be already competitive. And I'll show you a few examples. So the message here is that simple and low interest financing is a huge key enabler of the clean energy economy. Huge, okay? Don't go home without it. Okay, so let me talk about quickly 4 enablers of financing mechanisms. The other breakout room is talking about feed-in tariffs, so I'm not going to talk about that, but let me talk about the other 4. And the last one is a potential game changer. But let me talk about PACE first. So in the recent report of the California solar cities, Sonoma came up as #1 in terms of both per capita solar capacity and in terms of per capita number of installations of solar. And that was not, that was by design, actually, because Sonoma County, over the last 3 years, have had something called PACE, a property assessed clean energy, which is a very simple and low interest mechanism to finance clean energy and efficiency. And they have a website. You go on the website, you click a few clicks, and boom, you're going, right? And this is done by the county itself. Now, here's what's interesting about Sonoma. So 4.5 installations per capita may not sound like much. 500 watts of solar per capita may not sound like much. But if we extrapolate those numbers to the whole state of California, here's what we get. If all California, every single city, and Bill, I agree with you that this is not going to come from the federal government. Cities are going to have to build up the clean energy economy, okay, from the bottom up. And if all we did over the next 8 years is copy the model of Sonoma, then we would have 1.7 million installations and 19 gigawatts of solar, okay? If all we did was cut and paste. Now, if we improve on it, boy, imagine what we could achieve. Now, let me give you 5 reasons why I think we're going to surpass even that. 1, Sonoma has already the template. They've gone through the learning process. I'm going to take a little bit more time, sorry. They've gone through the learning process. We can just copy and paste it, right? 2, the cost of solar today, now they started this program 3 years ago. The cost of solar today is 60–70% lower than it was just 3 years ago, the cost of solar panels, right? So it's making more and more economic sense than even 3 years ago. 3, we have a better economy than 2009. No, it's not great yet, but it's far better than we did 2009. We have 8 years to do what Sonoma did in 3. I mean, is it a stretch to think that we can do it? I don't think so. And finally, some of you may know that the Federal Housing Finance Agency actually rallied against PACE. But in fact, PACE in Sonoma happened even without the FHFA. And now we know that it can work without them, right? So those 5 reasons alone mean that we can in fact go to 1, 2, 3 million roofs by 2020. Now, let me give you another finance mechanism that has been used in New Jersey. Now, this is not either or, by the way. This can all be done at the same time. So in New Jersey, they have done a pretty innovative financing mechanism called the Morris model, which is a bond/PPA, and I'm not going to go into too many details. It's a bond/PPA model, and look at the cost that's coming out of that. New Jersey, with the solar radiation of New Jersey, has been getting 3–4 cents per kilowatt hour. PG&E's average is 12.5 cents, right? This is California, people. We have a lot of sun. So did I tell you that? Look at that. So what I'm saying is that yes, the sun makes a difference, but financing mechanisms make a bigger difference, way bigger difference, okay? And I ran out of time a while back, so I'm not gonna get into all the details, but the thing that these two financing mechanisms have in common is that they need the local government to be able to bond, okay? Because when the local government has the ability to basically sell bonds, they can get very low interest rates. And that's what's making the big difference in both these mechanisms. Okay, third-party finance, which is another way to go. Let companies like Solar City or Longevity, based here in Oakland, Sunrun, One Roof, and so on. In fact, today, 70+% of all the residential solar in California is done using third-party finance. These companies are basically doing it all. They're installing, operating, maintaining, financing. They own everything, pretty much. You can lease it, you can do a power purchase agreement, and you don't have to pay anything down. And that's part of the key. You don't have to pay anything down, no capital down, zero. Okay, now, this is a potential game changer, okay? And I left it for last for a good reason. Solar crowdfunding. Now, recently, the Obama administration signed the Jobs Act, that was last month, which basically allows startup companies to raise money directly from individuals online, okay? So any company can actually raise up to $50 million from up to 1,000 investors before they go to the SEC to let them know. This is a big change. Now, several companies were or have been already raising money from individuals for projects. And here in Oakland, again, there's a company called Solar Mosaic, which has been raising money from people to invest in developed solar. Now, what they could not do up to this act was return money other than the actual principal to the investors. Does this make sense? So basically, folks gave $100, for instance, to help build a solar power plant, and all they could get back is $100. What the Jobs Act allows companies to do is to say, give me that $100, give me that $1,000, I will give you 3% interest, or I will give you 4% interest. So, in fact, individuals can invest directly in solar power plants, okay? So this changes, or this has the potential to change everything. One, individuals can get 3-4% or whatever it is that they're charging, instead of getting 0% today with Wells Fargo and Bank of America, right? So individuals, whether you put $100 or $1,000, can own the financing mechanisms. That could be huge, right? And they also own that solar power plant. They may own 1/10 or 1% or 1% of 1%, but it's better than just keeping the money earning nothing in the bank. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, companies already doing this in the UK with wind, and Solar Mosaic has announced that they're going to do it in this summer. So I'm not saying go with Solar Mosaic. I'm saying that if you want to build new solar power plants, there is a way for it to be built by individual, by the people, for the people. Okay? So you'll make money directly from, you'll own the solar power plants. That's a game changer in my opinion. So to close the talk, and I apologize, I ran way over time. By 2015, that's only 3 years out 40 to 50 million homes in the US could get solar that's cheaper than what they're paying the grid. Okay? Just 3 years out. So the time to do it, the time to get started, the time to finance, this is now. We don't need to wait 3 years. The time is now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tony. And so now we'll hop right in with Paul Fenn. Paul Fenn drafted the nation's first community choice aggregation, CCA bill, and law in Massachusetts in 1994. And he went on to advise on the drafting of most of the CCA laws in the United States. It was in Ohio in 1999 and New Jersey in 2003. And in California, Fenn drafted the CCA law, AB 117, which was adopted in 2002. Having learned from the experience of the nation's first CCAs in Massachusetts and Ohio, Fenn has created new strategies and authorities to augment CCA, such as drafting the nation's first bond financing authority for renewable energy and efficiency, San Francisco's Proposition H Bond Authority, which was approved by the voters in 2001. And Mr. Fenn helped craft the California Public Utilities Commission's rules and procedures relative to CCA, and is leading advisor to CCA's implementation, leading a group of engineers, wholesale power experts, state policy and legal experts, modelers, data specialists, power generation, distribution, transmission specialists, all under his company, Local Power, Inc. He's based right here in the Bay Area, and they focus on community energy localization. Local Power's recent clients include the City of San Francisco, who's been working with them since 2007 to the current time, also Boulder, Colorado, Sonoma County, Sacramento Municipal Utilities District, and Mr. Fenn holds a master's degree with a PhD fellowship in history from the University of Chicago and has received numerous awards and has had numerous articles published in recent years, culminating in a new book on energy economics and politics entitled, "This is Not a Theory." Welcome, Paul.
Thanks very much, Jim. And just move quickly, just push this button to go to the next. Yeah. So you've heard about Grid Energy Authority. There's been great progress in the last few years, really, with community choice aggregation, developing closer and focused toward renewable energy. Grid Energy Authority is an example of that. They've now got a 50% renewable service, which is price competitive with PG&E's 13% renewable service. And just 2 weeks ago, the city of Cincinnati approved a CCA contract that's 100% renewable. You've got Evanston, Illinois, about a month ago, did the same thing, 100% renewable. Now these CCAs are all using renewable energy credits to do that. And part of the, so while I'm proud of it and think it's wonderful, I also see the limitations of that approach, and so we've been trying to get CCAs to focus more on direct development of renewables for the past 10 years. San Francisco is keeping focus on that. I'm going to tell you about what the city's doing. Sonoma, I guess you've heard from Sonoma today, they're also very focused on that outcome. And so, but there's not a lot of literacy. Most of you, I'm sure, are literate in the subject, but I just felt compelled to sort of make some basic distinctions here about what defines green energy. Virtual green energy is essentially the renewable energy credit. It is the ability to purchase the attribute from someone else's energy and tag your own energy supply with that attribute. It was a product of deregulation laws that sought to delocalize markets, to commoditize energy resources in order to facilitate trading. And those trading systems have come to essentially reify bilateral contracting agreements between multiple parties to constitute legally green power. And so the power that has been tagged as with renewable energy credits is in fact not renewable energy. It's important to understand that the actual physical power that has been contracted for and the power delivered, which is less important, is not renewable. And so the cost attributes of that power still retain the characteristics of conventional power. If the price of the fuel goes up, then the cost of that power goes up with it. Why? Because it is in fact combusting fuel to generate the power, even though it's legally green because the RECs, the renewable energy credits, have been purchased and the tags attached to that power. So does that cause a stimulation of green power development in other places? Yes, it does. It does, right? So as far as upstream impacts, it is positive. Energy Authority is much greener than PG&E. It's a valid statement. It's not fraud, but it's also not real. And what it means is that you've still got fossil fuel. You don't have market protection. You're still depending on transmission to deliver. You are exporting community wealth to the fuel suppliers, and you're not creating any jobs. So if you go to real, there are two levels of real. One level of real is regional renewables. That's where you're actually taking power from facilities that exist in your region, which are committed to you contractually, and which are physically delivering power to your substation and to you. In that case, you are getting protection from fuel cost charges, you are getting regional economic protection, exposure to volatility in those markets, but you're still exposed to transmission charges on the utility bill. And under these sort of new regulatory regimes that we have in California and many other states, the primary market gaming opportunity for the utilities are transmission and distribution charges. So PG&E in the last general rate case last year just got the CPUC to approve cost shifting from transmission distribution into generation, from generation charges into transmission distribution charges. When they do that, they essentially harm the ability of a customer to choose solar or choose some other supply as long as they have to pay those transmission distribution charges. So even if you're buying green power from a local wind farm, you're exposed to that factor on your electric bill, and it can harm you in the future. It causes a great deal of uncertainty. The next level of real, the ultimate real, is behind the meter renewable energy. That's renewable energy that's on their rooftop or in your building. It's behind the PG&E meter. Because the distribution and transmission charges are volumetric charges, any reduction on your electric meter will automatically result in a reduction in transmission distribution charges. In other words, solar panels and energy efficiency measures in a building are exempt from transmission and distribution charges. There's no basis on which to charge them. They're volumetric charges. So if you don't use the energy, they can't charge you for it. You're not using it, it's not showing up on the meter. So you have this sort of physical protection against regulatory risk on the meter, as well as all the benefits of regional renewables. You're not just saving money on the generation portion of the bill, but on the whole bill. And you have this permanent personal protection against volatility in the market, in addition to the regional protection that regional renewables give you. So really three different kind of levels of real, which are important within the literacy of renewable energy to understand. If you're going to change to a system, focused on the real, it means a change in the business model, really, in terms of how you're thinking about designing a service. So the idea of energy as a commodity, Sam Insull's invention, the kilowatt hour, money and hour, energy and time, is no longer germane. You're looking at the bill, not the rate. The rate doesn't matter. The bill's what matters, right? You might pay a higher rate, but pay a lower bill. In fact, California pays higher rates than average in the U.S., but it has lower bills on average. Why? Because we have a lot more energy efficiency in California. And so the bill matters, and to focus on the bill is called energy as a service. So I'm just going to move quickly here. So, thinking about that picture of green power supply, the conventional idea of green energy, if you sort of shrink that down, the grid and generator supply, and focus on those distributed resources efficiency, you have the new value proposition. And it, in fact, is totally different. As far as the investment, not in building up supply, but in building renewable energy and demand-side measures, creating local green jobs, creating social equity, the opportunity to own your power supply and not merely to buy greener power to mitigate your lifestyle. And then local wealth retention, the localization of supply, and the local business activity caused by that has significant multiplier effects in the economy. I'm not going to go through the whole list here, but you should get a pretty good impression as to all of the consequences of actual localization as opposed to simply greening supply or these virtual green systems. Looking at the volume of money that's involved in power supply, it's one of the largest funds of money that exists. In fact, in the city of Oakland, the amount of energy that would be involved in the CCA exceeds the discretionary budget of the city. And so in terms of an economic development fund, this is a great deal of money. And the ability to focus that money investment-wise from a system which is essentially globalized into a system that is more distinctly local is pretty substantial. Just to build on the importance that Tony talked about of finance. You know, most people say CCA, but probably the most important opportunity within CCA is the opportunity to issue revenue bonds. It's an investment opportunity. And the history of that is quite well known, the history of the New Deal, and the relationship between essentially a revenue collection authority and a financing authority, which was the basis of building all infrastructure, bridges in particular, the toll booth being the symbol of that. The authority to collect tolls at bridge, providing the basis for the issuance of debt and for the ability of governments to build bridges where no business could profitably do so. As far as what the method that's required, it's kind of a reverse engineering of energy, right? The energy business today is all focused on commodity markets. You start out with going out to the wholesale suppliers or power plant owners or fuel supply owners and negotiating with them, and then you sort of from that point focus on, oh, let's do some solar programs. Let's do some efficiency programs. So essentially you're mitigating the main product. In this case, the main product is efficiency in solar, and the backup product is wholesale supply. The method used to do that, we're doing in San Francisco and other places, is to look at, on the top there you see the temporal characteristics of energy in a place. This is a county in California, so the red dots being the peaks, and yellow and blue being the dips. And then the geographic concentration of energy use. When does the energy requirement occur? Where does the energy requirement occur? What are the characteristics? Sort of deconstructing energy, breaking it down to smaller pieces so that you can target local renewable resources which are themselves temporally limited. Okay? There's generally this, again, going back to the idea of energy generally is, oh, you can be more green or less green, we'll put energy into the grid, take it out of the grid. These are false metaphors. In fact, renewable energy, if it requires significant export to the grid, will never penetrate beyond very limited levels. So the idea of net metering as a metaphor for how to green an economy is totally false. It's inherently capped. You can never go very far through that mechanism because it in fact causes essentially a blind re-engineering of the grid. You're placing solar panels in places just because the person who lives there had the money for it. Not because that feeder could take that capacity. Not because the load on the site actually was coincident or matched by that capacity. There's no engineering. There's no thinking. So to do it at a larger scale requires a lot of thinking. And so that over there, the 3D image there shows you the so-called 5760 data, which is the annualized hours of energy consumption in a county. The peaks of those mountains being the high points. And so, look, I'll wrap up. Try to anyway. And so what you end up with when you go through that process is a specific portfolio. This was something that we did for trying to get Marin on board a few years ago, which they rejected, but that shows you a localization, not just a greening, but a localization over time, which corresponds to localization of bill parity. That is, that no increase in the electric utility bill cost to the region. And finding that delta enables a rationalization of the processes and a breaking up of the pieces into contractual components, and then essentially a municipal solicitation process to build all those components. And so, the job potential is massive. I mean, these are direct jobs, right? So if you go to indirect or induced jobs, you're doubling, tripling the impacts. These are potential jobs and estimates, but the idea of being able, through a single policy with very little public or taxpayer burden, to create thousands of jobs, pretty much unprecedented. And so the example is we're doing in the city, we're drafting up a series of RFPs which will build out somewhere between 51% and 100% of the power supply of the city. But it's a lot of work there, a lot of data collection analysis, and a lot of modeling, a lot of permitting analysis, and just, it's a public works project. It'll be between $400 million and $1 billion over 5 years. It's what the Bay Bridge was supposed to cost, basically, right? It's not just a little project, not just a few solar panels, it's a ton of stuff. But it's supportable by that huge amount of revenue that I showed you there. A couple $100 million a year in revenue that people are paying on their bills right now. Not new government tax revenue, old utility-controlled revenue that's being essentially re-diverted over into new public contracts. So I'll go quickly through these. I'm sorry that I'm so slow on my slides here, but there are a number of strategies there, going behind the meter, that you wouldn't find from a conventional supplier, because going behind the meter is a loss. Reducing, for a utility, reducing energy use is a loss. You can make up for it with incentives, but ultimately it's a loss. But we're actually focusing on how to reduce throughputs. That's the actual purpose of this new entity. Not just a public takeover of a private service, but a new business model, a different way of doing it and focusing that resource. Now here in the East Bay, there's interest, I know, in East Bay mud possibly leading up to CCA, and there's been obviously for about over 7 or 8 years a bunch of work done by these cities looking at CCA. And the cities listed here could or could not, depending on their level of interest, participate. But SB 790, a bill passed last year by Senator Leno, allowed water districts like East Bay Mud to take more of a leading role in CCA formation. And this potentially could be even bigger than San Francisco, because it's really, the East Bay is the true center, industrial people center of the Bay Area, and has massive load and more industrial load, ports, things that San Francisco gave up years ago for banks and high-rises. And so, did I just miss a thing there? I don't know, how do you go back on this thing? Oh, back. Next, previous. I jumped a slide. Oh, I didn't, sorry. So as far as approach, and this is just a couple more slides here, one thing I wanted to on the government side, for CCA, those of you here from government, feasibility studies really aren't necessary, and it's something that have been used, I think, just to make money for consultants. When, in a traditional municipal utility, what you needed a feasibility study because you're going to take over a utility, you were going to, without knowing what the cost of the system would be, have a public vote, and then go to court to decide how much you have to pay the utility, which would determine what your rates are going to be. And so feasibility studies were designed to predict what the end game would be if you did all those things. Therefore, the public would have a basis to vote on whether to do it. CCAs don't have any of those factors. You're not taking over the system. There is no inherent acquisition cost. It's a very marginal cost to take over power service and control the revenues. And you're issuing bonds simply based upon those revenues. It's all more or less hermetic. So you're not causing all these open-ended hemorrhage, cash hemorrhage risks that you do in a traditional municipalization. You don't need to study CCA. All you need to do is figure out what you want to do and go out to bid. And you get bids back, and then decide whether you want to do that. You don't have to proceed blindly based on what a consultant promises you. And so we really encourage focusing on, define your policy goals, and then build a business plan around those goals. You can attach normative figures of what you think it should cost you, but primarily you want to define what they are, and then go out to the market and see what the developers can offer you, see what the suppliers can offer you, and bundle them together. Another important factor, again, to reinforce the importance of finance, if you don't focus on finance, so this is a big challenge we've had in San Francisco, it's everywhere we've dealt with CCAs and local governments, is their hesitance to talk about bonds. There is obviously the opportunity for private finance and private debt and private equity to bring them to build these things. However, he who pays owns. And so communities that simply depend upon private financing are effectively selling out to a new supplier that will end up owning the thing. There's more flexibility, it's more progressive than a utility, but the role of public finance is pretty important as far as getting skin in the game for the government, and also to clearly define the determination of a government to fulfill its policy mandate. Not just to say we want to have a solar program, but to say we're going to build a bridge. It's a big difference saying we're going to go out to the market and see what they'll pay for. But we're going to build a bridge, which means you've got to have a bond authority, you've got to put it on the table, and then you can attract your equity money. But to say, oh, we'll just defer that question because we don't have political support, okay, then you're not really doing it. And you're essentially creating a political crisis in the future, and where you're going to have to backfill and make up for that loss. It's important to put the finance part of CCA on the table up front and to get them to talk about it, to clarify what the governments are prepared to do politically, and to help them understand, as far as the PACE programs and other precedents, that this isn't black magic. This is something that's been done in various forms. It's an emerging structure that can be developed in different ways. But it's not a mystery. It's not magic. So as far as jobs are concerned, one of the big bottlenecks on this whole thing is you've got a whole new labor base that's needed to implement these programs, particularly on the efficiency side. 90% of the jobs in that model are efficiency jobs. Why? Because you have to go into every damn house and apartment and put in equipment, not just go up and put up a megawatt on a roof, which you can do in a few days. It's very labor intensive, and it goes on forever, right? So you have a decade of retrofits with 1,000 people running around. That's what we're talking about. And so there's a need to rationalize the labor force. You also have to sort of balance the desire of the, under public contracts, of the unions to have control of these jobs with the desire to have local workers receive the jobs, because they're different. We can idealize them and pretend they're the same, but they're not the same. The union jobs generally are white guys from Concord, right? And the local jobs aren't in the union. And so there's an issue there. You've got to reconcile them, and having a rational path means these aren't just jobs for 55-year-old guys. These are jobs for 20-year-old guys. And so if you have this sort of one-size-fits-all, if it's going to be $60 an hour no matter what, that's not a 20-year-old job. A 20-year-old job is $20 an hour. So there's a need to sort of get into the labor issues and not just be tonal about what it means to have local jobs. It doesn't just mean a union job. It also doesn't just mean poor people jobs. It's got to be somewhere in the middle, and to compromise to that. And obviously there's the training side of it, and I've experienced Larry is working on that, and Laney, an important dimension. And then there's the matter of local businesses. If you want to just have Honeywell and GE come in and build everything, well, where's the local benefit, right? But if you're going to hire small companies, Longevity or whatever, that are local, then can they deal with project labor agreements? Can they deal with all the union requirements and all the red tape that you have to deal with to work in the city contract? That's pretty tough. And so there's a need to prepare the field so we're not just treating them like they're GE. They're not GE, they're a small company. And so there's the labor, there's the contracting requirements, and those have to be aligned rationally. Or else you just end up with super high cost labor, which could undermine the economics of the entire effort. And then for activists, the activists lead CCAs. They have in every case that I've seen. And so it's up to the activists to focus on the core decisions that need to be made and on the outcomes. There's a tendency in policy to turn the policy itself into the outcome. So we're going to have CCA. Yay. CCA. Yay. Who cares? If it's just a CCA that reproduces the old utility, so what? And so the activist job is to say, what are we going to build? Let's focus on the built thing. And this is one of the biggest challenges I've had doing CCA, is to get people to realize, it's the thing in the city isn't just CCA, it isn't just being greener. It's a major public works project. It's new because it's spraying it all over the place, and it'll be largely resident and business owned, and not just a government owned thing. But it's really big. It's all over the place. And to get people excited about it, and also to get the debate focused on that outcome and not just on CCA as if CCA itself were important, because it's not. So to focus on the local jobs, on the bonds. That we like the term rollout schedule, because it's not just a matter of how big you want it to be, but when you want it to happen. It could happen at the end of time. Great, 100% renewable by the year 3000. Big deal. And then customer ownership, the idea of social equity, which in some ways is more compelling to the general public than green power or carbon action, etc. Is this program in the city, and I think in Sonoma, it's going to offer community renewable shares to every customer. So whether you own a house or you're a renter, whether you are rich or poor, whether you have a credit card or don't have a credit card, you pay an electric bill. And that electric bill is essentially an investment account. Right now, the investment account is paying for PG&E's power plants. But we're going to switch it over into new infrastructure, and you, to the extent that you choose to become an owner of that infrastructure, may become an owner based on your monthly electric bill payments. So massive social equity opportunity built into this thing, where poor people are going to be offered ownership, okay? And it's pretty important to get that fact out and to get a focus on that, because it isn't just about greening or mitigating. It's about offering a new kind of wealth to people that would never think of such. Have never been offered anything like this before. So that's it. Sorry about going over. Thank you.
Great. So we still do have a little bit for time for questions and discussion, and I didn't know if any of the panelists had anything they wanted to add real quick. And I see a lot of hands, so maybe we'll just go from this end and there, across the room like that. So we'll take you first.
Do we have somebody to take the microphone around?
Paul, this is for you. I'm a strong supporter of CCA, and having recently retired from close to 25 years in the local government, and one of the things that I was able to do before I retired was to be able to look at CCA. And the key issue, while you said, forget feasibility studies, focus on the business plan, our local government couldn't come up with the funds. We're faced with key economic issues, we're laying off people, a variety of different things. We couldn't find the funds to do the business plan and what we would have had to done to be able to put everything you have to put together to submit to the CPUC in order to put that together. So instead, we started to focus on making solar permitting easier, starting to look at creating those PACE financing, structures, making it easier to get our residential community access to the financing for solar and doing those kinds of things instead of focusing on CCA. So the more immediate short term. In the long term, if the economy turns around, maybe we could look at CCA. But in this immediate economy, it wasn't something we could do. Where can local governments and activists find the money to put those business plans together?
Good to see you, Mary. It's been a while, and I sympathize. I think the part of it is the answer is to get focus. I think governments have tended, and during the navigate studies in that early period in California, governments spent a bunch of money on studying this thing. In some ways, sort of burned their wad on, so that by the end of it, they studied it. The study was of sort of dubious value, and they spent a bunch of money. And so as you say, today there's a fiscal shortfall, and it's much harder to pay for these kinds of any kind of study. So
there's some real things that you have to submit to the CPUC.
Yeah.
To start down the path.
Yes, that's true. So you've got to do some work, but the feasibility study approach, caused half of the problem, I would say, because it was looking at, gee, what will happen if we do CCA, and then the answer was, well, it could be good, bad. Okay, so now what are we going to do? It didn't really. It was premature to ask it, because CCA is so much about what are you going to do. What the feasibility in general is too general to have a meaningful economic model or a cost model. But if you said, all right, well, we want to set a target, focus the work on a portfolio design, on a business model, then you can have numbers that are pretty good. And that's what we're doing in the city, is just focus on, get a case that does work, rather than saying, oh, what are a range of cases that might work? Let's just do one, one that does appear to work well. And, and so my belief is that if you focus on that, you're much better off. You do still need to spend some money to do that. But I'd like to tell people, if people that consider municipalization are looking at spending hundreds of millions of dollars up front to bring about this kind of change. In this case, we're talking about spending, what, a few $100,000 up front. So if a city is not willing to spend a few $100,000 to take over $1 billion business, they probably shouldn't do it, because they don't have the political will to do it. And that's what it really comes down to. And for me, that's partly why the feasibility study was so, that whole thing that was happening with Navigant, that was funded by the CEC a few years back, was so misdirected because they didn't have a sufficient policy goal framework to compel political leaders to want to support it. It was too much gray area. And so when you get into those ambiguities, you think, well, why are we doing this? Oh, so we can have a marginally lower price in PG&E. So what? And then, but if we're going to say, no, we're going to go to, 51% plus renewable, which has kind of been our baseline with our clients, just if you're not going to do at least half, more than half change in a 5-year time frame, that's compelling. And the fact is that the economics of doing that versus the economics of some kind of soft green package aren't that different. It's just one has more upfront clarity about what it wants to do. One is more clear about the bond side of it, the public finance side. The other one says, well, we're not sure. Let's just hold back. And so the feasibility studies didn't get into bonds. They just said, well, how much does green power cost? We just heard about the fact that financing has such a greater impact on cost of renewables that if you leave that out, then you have this massive sort of inaccuracy in the model, simply because the government wasn't ready to answer, do you have any money in your wallet, or do you have a credit card? So that's where the importance of getting that, we're ready to issue bonds, just like PACE is normalized that, and we want 51% plus. Now you have this sort of much more narrow field where I think there's much less money to be spent on studies, and but as far as trying to eliminate the cost, I don't think you can eliminate the cost. Some of that cost is just the cost of of being in such a large business. The new value proposition, these are all just strategies. They don't require any new authorization from the legislature. CCA just gives you the rate setting authority, which is the main thing. You have the sovereignty over rate design. You have the authority to create new rate schedules or to create modifications to existing rate schedules. And obviously the authority to issue bonds, it occurs under local charters and is separate from the CCA law, but the control of revenue that's caused by the rate setting authority provides a basis for the issuance of bonds based on the security of that rate setting authority, plus additional securities to bring it to sort of bond quality. Within that, community solar shares is simply a decision of the CCA that it will, rather than say offering green power at a premium, pay extra for renewable energy, which is sort of the deep green product in the Energy Authority. Instead it says pay extra for ownership. But if you own, to the extent that the ownership is accrued to you, then you receive a bill credit reflecting that ownership, in which case the cost to you is offset. So it recreates the conditions of a feed-in tariff in effect, right? Where you pay extra in the rate, but you receive credits on the bill. And so no longer is it simply a mitigation or an equity point, but there's actually a bill offset caused by that ownership. And so that would fall under the rate setting authority and the financing authority of the municipality.
Just really quickly, I'm representing Sheila Berger, representing the Sonoma PACE program, and I just wanted to let everybody know we did receive a generous grant from the CEC this year, in part to create a replication package for other local governments to create a PACE program from scratch. I coordinated that project working with the San Francisco County, LA County, and Placer County programs. So I have some copies of that kit with me. I'll leave them up there. Unfortunately, I have to go back to an obligation at my son's school in 2 hours, so I need to go. But I'll leave them on the table. Also, you can download that from our website, SonomaCountyEnergy.org. And It's just a great how-to manual. Please tell anybody you know that might be interested in advocating for a PACE program in your community. Thank you.
Yeah.
Paul, Tom Kelly. Paul, I have a question for you. You know, right now, Marin Clean Energy is invited or talking to the city of Richmond about joining their CCA. We've tried in Berkeley to push the city to talk to Marin as well, but now East Bay Mud is in that mix, and they're sort of looking at things. I mean, what would your recommendation be to a city like Berkeley, for example, about these sort of competing CCAs, one that's already up and running and one that's sort of not even there and maybe never will be? I mean, how do you deal with something like that?
So that's a tough one. Hate to get in between these Marin. You know, I guess I tend to have I have my opinions about what they should do. I can give an opinion, but I'm not sure what value that is. I tend to think it's, you know, East Bay Mud, and I raise East Bay Mud not just because Andy Katz is here, but because, or others might be, but East Bay Mud, you know, looked at municipalization 2002, feasibility study with R.W. Beck. It has probably one of the most advanced water control systems in the U.S. It's got a bunch of generation, and it understands the energy business in many ways quite well. It has a dam, and so it already has a billing system. And so as an incumbent under SB 790, as an incumbent water utility, it's got a unique ability to just start to the extent that local municipalities are willing to go along with it. And I think, you know, as a very credible regional utility, that's an opportunity, it's an objective opportunity. You know, MEA has achieved great things, so I don't want to criticize it. However, and I live in Marin, I'm an MEA customer. I pay for the deep green at our office. So, you know, I'm into it, but Marin's a rich place. And it's full of people with, you know, 2 hybrid cars and zero energy homes and LEED certified suits. And so that's a certain kind of culture, right, which is affluent, very affluent. It's not focused on the jobs, it's not focused on wealth retention or on social equity. Those are things you find here. And so a lot of it is just a cultural thing, which is, you know, are you really going to get along with people in Marin if you live in Richmond? I grew up in Richmond, I don't think so. Maybe Point Richmond. And so, is there, you know, there's a more organic foundation for Richmond to go with East Bay Mud. As far as Oakland, Berkeley, you know, culture, the East Bay culture is I think there's a better fit. Now that being said, you know, if East Bay Mud isn't going to go ahead with it, then I would say they should join MEA. And so it is a question of, okay, what do the CCs want to do now? And it seems to me Berkeley has a political impasse because it has a hard time doing things. There's over-opinionated, too many cooks in the kitchen, you know, at city council meetings. And the mayor seems to be unable to not be quoted on PG press releases every 2 months. So he, you know, seems to be on the fence a little bit politically. Oakland, I'm not sure about. Richmond with Gail McLaughlin, I would think she would be a natural to want to do real local green things with jobs. And so if there were a focus that said, we want to do this locally, we want to have it not just be green, affluent green, not just deep green, but, you know, hard green, built green, real green, that would be another step forward that it seems to me ought to at least be tried.
They're already talking about it.
Yeah, I would follow up and say, you know, taking Paul's advice that he gave activists, which was the first thing was, find out what do you want. You want how many megawatts by when and how many jobs, and start with that, and then say, what CCA structure, our own, or joining in this group or that group, who's going to help us meet those goals, rather than saying, oh, what can that, oh, that CCA looks good, or that plan looks good. What are your goals? Outline your local renewable development goals, and then see which CCA will actually deliver that to you. So I would take define what you want locally first as the front. And I just, all the panelists can add on. These mics actually work, so I'm going to put this right back. And I don't know how much longer they're going to let us be in this room, but we'll just keep going until they kick us out, until Nancy
And there
Skinner
are
shows
lots
up.
of hands, so let's all be
So
quick.
I think we were going to move across the room, so maybe we'll hop over here and then.
Okay. This question's for Sarah. In your analysis of the additional health costs from fossil fuel generated power, did you include Tony's colleagues, Mark Jacobson's work, the Jacobson effect of increased mortality, morbidity in your analysis?
So I believe you're referring to the. I believe you're referring to the doming effect of CO2 in cities and urban areas. That you have a higher concentration of CO2 in the urban environment because of all the sources there. That can actually tend to aggravate, increase your ambient air quality problems. We did not include that in our analysis. We're just looking, current EPA air quality models don't account for that. So we're just looking at the primary direct effects of PM and PM precursors, so NOx and SOx as PM precursors. And we're only looking at the direct air emissions from fossil fuels, so it's not a full life cycle accounting methodology. But I did want to mention that California does have significantly lower costs than some of the national costs that I put up there. So it's 24 cents a kilowatt hour nationally for fossil fuel on average. If you look at it in California in particular, what's combusted in state is more like 1 cent a kilowatt hour in terms of fossil fuels. We have mostly natural gas. Natural gas has much lower health costs. If you actually add in the imported electricity, though, that we consume and all the health costs that others out of state bear on our behalf, that increases to 5 cents a kilowatt hour. You can dilute that back out because we have a lot of hydro. So if you're looking at on the grid overall, it's about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So those are the numbers that I used in the example I gave. And if folks have ideas, we are looking at launching that report. And so if folks have ideas or networks that you think would be interested, I'd also love to touch base with you afterwards. Thank you.
Hi. I am curious if successful CCA programs require a certain economy of scale or if these are appropriate for rural applications as well.
It somewhat depends on this, on where you are.
Without the political will.
Yeah, that's the real thing. Because
Yeah.
in rural areas, you talk generally because they don't have municipalities, so they might have a county.
Yeah.
We try to get a county to aggregate the unincorporated areas, and that can be done. As far as the cost of its relative to scale, I think really the demand profile is more of a factor than scale. That if you have only residential people, or there's no industry, there's no daytime load matched to the nighttime load. So if you have a place like Marin, actually, it was tough because you have this huge nighttime peak, and everyone goes home and turns on the TV. Causes this huge peak in Marin. So one of the challenges of serving it was to deal with that big bubble at 5, 6 p.m. And those sort of things can harm the economics. Ironically, from suppliers like high-cost environments, and so coastal environments are lower cost because the peak is lower relative to the base load than it would be, say, out in the desert, where the daytime, the peak load is triple or quadruple over the base load from air conditioning. Out here, there's air conditioning, so it's actually a lower cost to serve, but from the point of view of a supplier, there's less profit to be grabbed from serving it. And so you get into those sort of issues around load shape, but it really does vary. So I wouldn't say that if you're, 5,000 people couldn't do it. And the ease of 5,000 people is that you could focus more on local generation, right? And and sort of marginalize the function of wholesale power. You'd have maybe a harder time getting attention from suppliers, but you'd have a much easier time innovating than a lot of big cities would, where you have to fight for 10 years to get anything to happen.
Quick question for Tony. That return that can now be paid on crowd-financed things,
Crowdfunding, yes.
what is it in the project that generates that return? I mean, I can see for utility-scale solar projects, of course, but distributed generation, like on people's houses or small businesses, where is that return actually going to come from? What's the business model there? Thanks.
The business model, business model is the same. I mean, whether you build a 5K power plant or a 5 megawatt or gigawatt power plant, there is a similar, given the scales, project financing mechanism. So somebody brings in the equity, which gets a return on that equity, and then somebody finances the project with a return, interest rate return, and so on. So whether it's a small or a large power plant, there's always a return to somebody. Does that make sense? And right now, what companies like Sungevity and Solar City and Sunrun and so on, what they're doing is aggregating that demand. Does that make sense? So they're functioning as as a conduit to finance a whole bunch of smaller power plants. But if you aggregate all that, it's not dissimilar to utility scale, if that makes sense. So, build your own small power plant for 15K, bring 30 investors, and they're gonna get a return from the electricity that somebody pays for.
As long as there's a whole bunch of you doing it.
Yes, and that's
Okay.
the idea. Yeah, that's the idea,
Thanks.
of course.
Yeah, this is for Sarah. My name's Eric Brooks. I've been working as an activist in San Francisco to get a locally built out CCA program there called Clean Power SF. And by the way, to all of you communities, the key to this, to getting real local build outs, is you've got to get activists together in that community and push hard. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So my comment and question is, you probably learned today from watching Paul's presentation that, and I want to reinforce this, that in San Francisco, after a 5-year battle since 2007, we were finally basically forcing the local utility agency by hiring local power to do the work, to do a big local build out of hundreds of megawatts of renewables and efficiency. So that actually is happening in San Francisco. Part of the reason it was such a huge battle is that the investor-owned utilities like PG&E are able to, donate to campaigns and exert huge amounts of pressure on our local governments. And we need the federal government to provide incentives, put the carrot out there for local communities. We just heard from somebody that used to work for a local community that they need to have upfront funding. There's a small amount of upfront funding that if they just had, later when the revenues come in from the renewables and efficiency, they could pay that off. So if the government could loan that small amount of money to communities to get them started on local distributed generation-based CCAs, we could get a lot of them started a lot faster.
Absolutely, and I do want to commend both Marin and San Francisco for including in part of their vision a local energy component. And I think that's very difficult to achieve, and I think that it's great to see that San Francisco has a strong component of that. And I hope that as future efforts get off the ground, they can build on the successes that Marin and San Francisco have started already working on. I agree, federal funding would be great, and unfortunately we're fairly cash strapped at the moment, but I'll continue to have those conversations.
A revenue-based model.
Right, I definitely agree that there's a need for seed funding to get these projects up and running, and wish there were more federal resources to devote to it.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're out of time because we got to get the next session in here. So we'll take a little break. We want to thank all our panelists.